Jurassic Park is a textbook example of high concept. Cloned dinosaurs in an amusement park resort run amok. But as last month's look at the film Jaws showed, high concept merely describes, it doesn't dictate. Because while Jaws the novel is undeniable pulp fiction made, appropriately, for reading on the beach, Jaws the film is recognized as a work of art. It's not just the concept, but the execution of that concept which matters. So, what the novel Jurassic Park has that makes its high-concept story special is that, much like Michael Crichton's previously discussed Andromeda Strain, this book is a techno-thriller. There's not just dinosaurs and chases. This book gets into the nitty-gritty of it, explores the implications and the unconsidered, adding to the verisimilitude of the work, making it feel more real that we could actually be stalked by a T-Rex or ambushed by a pack of intelligent raptors. Before beginning, I should mention that it's commonly considered correct today to refer to the creatures here as non-bird dinosaurs or non-avian dinosaurs, but for brevity, I will be saying dinosaur and assume that you know what I mean. Crichton builds slowly, first by giving us his perspective on the compromising of science, especially genetic science, because of its partnership with industry, presented through a mixture of real-life events and his fictional backdrop for the world of Jurassic Park. Things slowly creep forward then with a visit to a clinic with a dying man babbling something about a raptor, a little girl on a beach attacked by a lizard, stories of babies and old people being attacked by small creatures, infants in their cribs being killed, until a creature is finally pulled from the mouth of a monkey and is sent off for examination. What looks like a lizard, but a passing remark notes its resemblance to a dinosaur, leading it into the hands of Dr. Alan Grant, an expert on dinosaurs and currently excavating in the Badlands. At the same time, the EPA pays a visit because of his connection with John Hammond, who's been buying a great deal of advanced technology and sending it to Costa Rica, raising flags that he might be up to some illegal genetic experimentation. To get out in front of it, Hammond presses Alan and Ellie Sattler, a paleobotanist, to come to his island, joined by a lawyer named Gennaro there to investigate the park's safety on behalf of Hammond's investors. Incidentally, I know the film pronounces it Gennaro, but I have never heard that pronounced that way anywhere else. Every person I've met with that name has been pronounced Gennaro. Even Scott Brick in the audio version of this book pronounces it Gennaro, so pardon me if I continue pronouncing it that way instead of the 2 or 3 times it's mentioned in the movie. They're joined by Ian Malcolm, a cutting-edge mathematician in the field of chaos theory, and extremely full of himself. They soon realize why 2 paleontologists have been invited when they see living, breathing dinosaurs on Hammond's island. They're here to confirm what Hammond and his staff, Dr. Wu, the geneticist, and Mr. Arnold, the supervisor, already believe, that this island is safe and under control, though the gamekeeper, Muldoon, doesn't seem as convinced. Because of the fame of the film and the fact that I'll be covering it soon, I feel the need to mention now that this is not the John Hammond that you know. This Hammond is an unabashed huckster who amassed the fortune needed for this little project by carrying around an elephant no bigger than a cat to prove how genetic engineering is capable of seemingly impossible wonders. The creature is nothing but a prop to Hammond, though, and his sole concern for it is that the unhealthy and unhinged animal might die before his partner can grow him a replacement. The idea behind what Hammond was doing was based upon a discussion during the 80s during the ever-growing use of genetic engineering, and a controversial court case at the dawn of that decade. A scientist working at General Electric created a bacteria to eat crude oil spills, and so sought a patent on it. In Diamond v. Chakrabarty, this issue was considered by the Supreme Court, and in a 5-4 ruling, ruled that by creating a new organism, Chakrabarty had a new and useful composition of matter, meeting the requirements for patenting. Thus, the possibility that other organisms, including animals, being patented and treated like a new microchip, was frequently debated, and naturally would be an issue with Hammond's dinosaurs. Crichton shows contempt for this, opening the book before any of the action with his dissertation on this collapsing ethics of scientists who take jobs at companies rather than at universities, focusing on profitable research instead of the knowledge for knowledge's sake. The miniature elephant is an example of how someone unscrupulous could create a poor and suffering creature, and a prelude to the harm of Hammond's park. It also comes up when Dr. Wu tries to persuade Hammond to go to a version 4.4 of the dinosaurs. They have updates like software to address problems in the patched-together DNA. But Wu would like to go a step further and engineer the dinosaurs to better meet the public's expectations, with the argument that what they've created can't actually be considered real anyway. They've done their best to reconstruct them, but that's all they've done. So further improvements would not be a problem. But Hammond insists on the real thing, minus the lysine dependency built in to contain them, and the tweaks to ensure that they are fully protected under the Supreme Court ruling. The visitors, including Hammond's visiting grandchildren, Tim and Lex, are sent out on a tour, during which Hammond boasts, as Richard Kiley's voice serves as a tour guide, that they have spared no expense here. But this is a massive lie. More of Hammond as a huckster, because Hammond has been cutting corners at every opportunity, not spending money on a proper dock for one, working to minimize staff for another. The automation being implemented is solely so Hammond doesn't have to waste money on employees and thus increases profits. He may have an obsession with dinosaurs, but even that must bend before his true passion, money. As he remarks, entertainment is not a necessity, so the government can't try to pressure them into doing unprofitable things the way that it could if they'd cured cancer or developed a life-saving drug. This naked avarice is what is going to doom the park, because one of the cases of penny pinching is with his computer programmer, Dennis Nedry. For maximum secrecy, Nedry was never told what it was he and his team were working on, and as a result, there were bugs in the system, more than what Jurassic Park's team could deal with. They needed Nedry to come out and fix the programming, but they didn't want to pay him for that. While Nedry is under an NDA, there is no mention of a contract for bug support. But InGen demanded that Nedry do it for free anyway. Nedry refused, so they sicked their lawyers on him and began sending letters to Nedry's other clients, saying that he was unreliable, until Nedry finally agreed to do the job for $0. This left Nedry naturally very disgruntled, which made him a perfect target for a geneticist named Dodgson at another company, offering Nedry a total of $1.5 million if he would smuggle out 15 different dinosaur species from the island. Getting a chance at revenge while making a stack of money was all the motivation that Nedry needed, so even now he was preparing to sabotage the system and steal some embryos. This actually undercuts part of Crichton's secondary theme, though, regarding chaos theory. Ian keeps telling us chaos says this park will fall, but it's really more in keeping with Crichton's recurring theme of being unable, no matter how smart we are, to predict everything. Now, this is no surprise, given that Crichton was a doctor, and as discussed with the Andromeda strain, according to Atul Gawande, one of the four most common killers in surgery is the unexpected. Things sometimes happen that you just didn't account for. So with the revelation that despite both radiation and creating a population solely of female dinosaurs, that they are still breeding in the park itself, one of the most tense scenes in the book merely in its implications, Ian sees this as further proof that we are heading towards what he has modestly named the Malcolm effect. To avoid bogging this video down, I'm going to discuss the bulk of the chaos theory material in a separate video later this week. Suffice to say that it is not chaos theory that dooms the park, it's greed. It is the greed of John Hammond, who cuts corners to expand his bottom line. It's the greed of Biosyn and Dodgson, who are willing to do whatever it takes to achieve domination of the genetics industry, whether it's industrial espionage or conducting unethical experiments on third world peasants. It's the greed of Dennis Nedry, who put everyone at risk trying to carry out his plan. Crichton's opening lamentations about the corruption of science by money sets greed up as the true menace of the novel. With Nedry's sabotage, the party of tourists has the misfortune of stopping outside the Tyrannosaurus exhibit. In his terror over the situation, eventually Ian gets out of the car and tries to run for it, getting severely wounded by the full-grown T-Rex. Spared from immediate death only because he's just the wrong size for it, small enough that it picks up his entire body in its mouth rather than tearing off mouthfuls of meat, but not so small that the T-Rex can swallow him whole, so he is merely horribly, horribly wounded. The park public relations head is not so lucky, because he encounters the juvenile T-Rex, and so is of appropriate size to be pinned down and ripped into bite-sized morsels. With both pieces of bad news, Alan and the two kids have no choice but to escape into the park to avoid the predators. Ian is eventually rescued, and Muldoon deduces that the best way to find the survivors is to use the motion sensors that keep track of the dinosaurs, but the system is still compromised, and Mr. Arnold and Dr. Wu are having a hell of a time trying to figure out how to fix it. With Alan and the kids in danger, facing repeated attacks by the T-Rex and the pterodactyl's larger cousins, plus Ian certain to die without proper medical attention, Mr. Arnold has to just shut down the whole thing and try to bring everything back up again piece by piece, a setup to ensure that whatever took it down doesn't shut the whole thing down all over again. For example, if the Dilophosaur feeding system caused the shutdown, you could still start up the rest of the park and leave that part of it off until it gets fixed. But he forgot to switch on main power, and so ran the entire park off of auxiliary power, which meant the fences were off this entire time, as he rapidly learns when he's surrounded by escaped velociraptors. There's a dark humor in Atul Gawande's assertions about checklists saving lives that would have saved the man who could have used one to avoid missing that. This proves to be a fatal shortcoming, because while the T-Rex has been sedated and dealt with, allowing Alan and the kids to return, the raptors are now a problem. Rather than the singular, enormous, relentless predator that Alan and the kids have been fleeing through nature, the velociraptors are man-sized, numerous, intelligent, and capable of infiltrating human structures, placing this in stark contrast to the previous threat. The T-Rex in the wilds of the park made the trio desperate to get back to the safety of the resort, but we quickly see that simply because it was built by man does not mean the resort will shelter man from dinosaurs. Mr. Arnold's momentary escape from the maintenance shed demonstrates that when he still falls to the raptors, and Gennaro and Alan nearly suffer the same fate trying to restore power, while their kids are being stalked in the resort kitchen. This is not only its own terrifying situation, but a subtle indication of the implications of a minor plot point, that they saw raptors get onto the ship that's heading to the mainland, so they're going to need to stop it before landfall. These scenes show that nowhere would be safe if that happened, that the raptors can stalk humans even in their own structures, and the horror even further driven home when Ellie is attempting to keep the velociraptors on the other side of the fence distracted so that they won't attack anyone, only to learn that the velociraptors have been doing the same to her, keeping Ellie and the humans depending upon her occupied until other velociraptors can get into position to attack Dr. Wu. This shows the raptors as not only highly intelligent, but capable of complex coordination. It's one thing to flush out prey into an ambush. It's another to keep highly intelligent prey distracted long enough to ambush it where it stands, and have those not immediately benefiting still willing to cooperate. Chimps, which do in fact hunt for food in addition to their plant-based diet, will distribute the spoils in proportion to the aid in the kill, suggesting the amassment of raptor intelligence as comparable to chimps, possibly being setting the bar low. It comes back to Tim's computer knowledge to gradually try to piece together how to get the system back up and running, again to save themselves from the raptors. Alan is able to kill the velociraptors that get inside, thanks to tricking them into eating poison, and Tim kills the ones outside with electrocution when he gets things fully restored. This gives them a chance to take limited action, stopping the boat and for Alan, Ellie, Muldoon, and a very unhappy Gennaro to inspect a possible raptor nest in the wild, to assess just how bad the situation is, so that attempts to undo it are thorough. They discover that these dangerous killers are breeding like crazy, but what's more, demonstrating behavior suggesting they are responding to bird-like instincts to migrate, which obviously would be a disaster, although Ian responds derisively to histrionics that this happening would destroy the planet, prompting an extremely pedantic sermon that you can't destroy the planet. The only problem with the character of Ian Malcolm is that he is very obviously just a mouthpiece for Crichton, and so in addition to using his authority as an expert in chaos theory to prove Crichton's long-running feelings about human failings, he is also prone to speeches that clearly are the author's own frustrations. Ian calls men like Dr. Wu thin-intelligent because they are solely interested in the problems before them and not other things. Ian feels that the result of scientific progress is more work than our ancestors needed to do, and thus we all need to wake up. This is not to say that Crichton is wrong about everything. These are points that should be open to consideration, especially the idea of ethics being an essential aspect of science, and right to regularly question ourselves, to consider if we might be doing the wrong thing simply out of inertia. But the approach leaves some things to be desired, especially the tendency of Crichton to give Ian intellectual adversaries that hurl softball questions at him. To quote from a review of his novel Rising Sun, "As entertainment, it's far too didactic." Crichton has a point of view, and his novels are a valid place to express it, but one can't help but wonder if he might have benefited from a blog to get some of these things out of his system, rather than resorting to writing one of his critics into his novel as a poorly endowed baby rapist. As a result, there is a certain dark humor in the choice of Ian Malcolm as the only victim of the full-size T-Rex, despite its relentless pursuit of Grant and the kids, and its resistance to the efforts of Muldoon to try to bring it down. The only one who falls before it in the end is the character who is so damn sure of how smart he is. Crichton no doubt did so because, as someone wounded and helpless, Ian cannot be expected to make any constructive contribution to their situation, so he is free to sermonize, whereas if he were perfectly healthy, it would be seen as smug, self-congratulatory, and poorly timed distraction. Still, if I saw someone who thought that getting out of a car and running up an open road with high fences on both sides was the best way to escape a predator, I wouldn't be hoping to hear what other genius ideas they might have. Ian is on death's door, and as far as the conclusion of this book is concerned, he dies. But he's not the only casualty in this late hour. The kids are playing around in the control room and set off a T-Rex roar that causes their grandfather to tumble away in fright, injuring himself. And being old and injured is not a good combination when scavengers like Compsognathus are around. Despite being within sight of his bungalow, Hammond cannot drive them off, and one gets a bite on him. A problem because there's a narcotic in the bite. In Poetic Justice, Hammond succumbs to the euphoric effect of the compy's bite and lays down, described as laying, quote, as still as a child in its crib, a not-so-subtle comparison to the many Costa Rican infants who fell victim to his creation, which then crawl over his splayed body and feed. The Costa Rican military arrives to evacuate and bombs the island to Kingdom Come. The survivors are kept effectively prisoners in a hotel, while the Costa Ricans try to get to the bottom of things. But worse news arrives for Grant, when the scientist from the beginning of the book swings by to explain about the strange consumption of chickens and food rich in lysine in a straight line, like a migration, and combined with Hammond's earlier reflection that embryos were kept safely preserved in Palo Alto just in case, making clear this isn't the end at all for dinosaurs on the Earth. A setup for a sequel, except it wasn't intended as one, as Crichton has never made one before that and only did when, after the blockbuster film, Spielberg persuaded him to make an exception. While this is not a review of The Lost World, Crichton's sequel to this, I feel it necessary to mention that the next book was not about chaos theory or about technology. It was about extinction, its role in evolution, and the implications of a system artificially established out of balance. The reason I mention that is because it reflects on why Crichton likely never made sequels. His books aren't about characters, they're about ideas to be explored. This novel has adventure, excitement, tension, and scares. But the real park for Crichton is populated with concepts and themes that maintain his interests. Writing dinosaurs may be fun in that context, but only in the context of the opportunities that they provide him to explore.